This is my first time being a speaker at training, so I think this is maybe my 8th or 9th time coming to this training, but I've always just sat out there with you guys. I've never been the person up here during training, but this year they asked me to do a piece of it, and the topic that they gave me was dealing with difficult topics. And so this is my first time. The first thing I do, I have to do difficult things. And really, that is not exactly what we're going to be talking about. I mean, it is. It's not a lie. We are going to be dealing with difficult topics, but that's really vague. This is specifically the part of the training that is about sexuality and gender. So about, 4 to 6 weeks ago, they asked me if I would do a sexuality and gender training here at camp training, and I said, sure. And we will see if I regret it or not. So I want to start off, I only got like 2 laughs on that. I don't plan on regretting it, but who knows? So I guess we will see. When I was a little kid, I had an older brother. Well, I still have an older brother. But when I was little, he was younger and I was younger, and he told me a story one time. And I don't know if this story is true, but I don't think it matters because I still think it makes the point that it makes. He told me that there used to be like a village of people, the village of farmers. And I think he said it was in China. In China, there was this village of people who were farming, and so they had their, the places that they lived and the fields that they farmed in and the marketplace and all that stuff. And that in this particular village, there were crows that would sweep down and would mess with the crops. And so the way this particular village handled that is they said, we're so tired of these crows messing with the crops. And so instead of putting out a scarecrow and trying to just scare the crows away from the fields, they decided what we're going to do is we're just going to try to eliminate every single crow. We're just going to kill them all. And so wherever they were, at their houses, in the marketplace, in the fields, anywhere, anytime anybody saw a crow, they pulled out their rifle and blew the thing out of the sky. And everybody in the village always killed every crow every time they saw one until the crows were all gone, okay? And it was a crow-free village. And then, my brother said, what happened is the next year, when they got close to harvest time, the farmers all went out and looked at the crops and noticed that there were bugs all over the crops. And the bugs were doing far more damage than the crows ever did. And the idea was the crows were always there, but they didn't know exactly what the crows were accomplishing until they got rid of the crows. And then they understood what was going on. And again, I don't know if that's true. I don't even know if crows are a species in China. I don't know. But I've always thought that story was interesting because of the idea of unintended consequences. Like you remove one of the pieces of the food chain and then you go, oh, I didn't know that that's the thing that happened when you do that. And so there are a lot of things that are like that, even if that story's not true. You see like conservationists who will say things like, developers want to come in and build a neighborhood, or they want to build a shopping mall or an office complex, and they will go, well, no, not in this area, because this is where the gopher turtles lay their eggs. And if there's no more gopher turtle stuff, then there's not going to be any more gopher turtles. And the idea is, we've always had gopher turtles. We don't know what happens when you remove all of them. We want to be careful about this. We don't know what happens if you don't have any. Or back in I think it was in the 70s, there was a concern about pesticides killing honeybees. Do you remember that? The idea was like, well, there's these pesticides are killing the animals we want, but it's also killing honeybees. And the idea was, we've always had honeybees, and we don't know exactly what happens if you eliminate all the honeybees at the same time. And so this is kind of the idea behind this is, these things have always been here, and we don't know what happens when you remove them. Okay, so traditional sexuality has always been here, okay? It's a species of behavior or species of belief that has always been around since the beginning of the world. And when I say traditional sexuality, I mean the combination of sex and marriage and male, female, and parenting, okay? The idea that sex is for marriage, and you're not supposed to be sleeping with people that you're not married to. The idea that marriage is between a male and a female. The idea that parenting is done by a male and a female that created people through sex that happened in the marriage that they were a part of. This thing that I'm calling traditional sexuality, it's always been here. Even in societies that aren't super biblical, or even in societies that did things in other ways or didn't follow it completely, even in like polygamous societies, they still connected sex to marriage and marriage to male and female and male and female to parenting. Like even in like a society where a man had 2 or 3 wives, like they still thought that you were supposed to sleep with your wives, not with people who you were not married to. And the marriages were between males and females, right? Even if a guy had 3 wives, the wives weren't married to each other. And the parenting was done by the people who had made the children. And so that idea of traditional sexuality, sex and marriage and males and females and parenting, that is something it's always been around. It is not something that is uniquely Christian. I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but it's not just a simply Christian thing. I know sometimes we hear about traditional sexuality and we go, oh, Christians, that's what they're into. It's not a uniquely Christian thing. There are things that are uniquely Christian, like baptism, right? I don't know if you know that. Buddhists don't baptize. Communion. Communion is uniquely Christian, right? Hindus do not practice communion. But people getting married to someone of the opposite sex and having children with that person and being faithful to that person and calling that a marriage, like that is not unique to Christianity, all right? Non-Christians get married as male and female and raise children together all the time. Atheists do it, Jewish people do it, Muslims do it, Hindus do it, Buddhists do it. This is just something that it's cross-cultural, it's not uniquely Christian. In fact, some of those other religions I just named say that that's the way you're supposed to do it. That's the only way you're supposed to do it. Like Christians say that, Jewish people say that, Muslims say that. I think Hindus are even that way. And so I'm telling you, when you look at different religions, different cultures, different nations, different periods of history, traditional sexuality has always been here, and we don't know what happens when you remove it or when you greatly minimize it. I mean, we're starting to see it a little bit because we are in a culture now that for a while has not linked sex to marriage, right? That there could just be sex, doesn't have to have anything to do with marriage. We are living in a culture that more recently has unlinked marriage and male and female. Certainly there's not a total connection between parenting and marriage or parenting and male and female anymore, right? Like those things we're in a transitional period where those things are being removed, and it's kind of like the crows in China. You don't know what they're doing until they're gone, right? And that can be true with gopher turtles, that can be true with honeybees, and it doesn't even have to be that they're all the way gone. You can have what's it called when you have a species that's not completely gone, but it's greatly minimized? Yeah, endangered. And so, traditional sexuality, we don't know what happens when you remove it completely. We don't know what happens when you greatly minimize or endanger it. But I would say, just looking at the way our culture is going, over the next 50 years, we may end up seeing what happens when that particular species of belief or that particular species of behavior is greatly minimized. Okay, if things keep going the way they are, I think what might very well happen is we will get to see what it was doing. Like, what was traditional sexuality contributing to? What harms was it preventing? Like, once most of it's gone, then we'll be able to see. But for now, we live in a world that is in transition from kind of one way of doing things to another. And I wanted you to realize that for a lot of the kids who go to our camp, I don't know if it's the majority of the kids or not, but a lot of the kids in our camp, in fact, all of the kids in our camp are under 18 years old, both camps. The kids are all under 18. And so the newer views of sexuality and gender, in some cases, it might be all they've ever known. Like many of us have lived in a time period where you go, oh, this is what people believe. Oh, no, that's what people used to believe. This is what people believe. But some of the campers are young enough that what they believe about this is the only thing they've ever heard, it's the only thing they've ever known. The new sexuality is all they've ever known. And so we are going to have kids at camp who do not connect sex to marriage. We're going to have kids at camp who do not connect marriage to parenting, as if those two things go together. We're going to have kids at camp who do not connect male and female to sex. We're going to have kids at camp who do not connect male and female to marriage or to parenting. And with TRAC in particular, we may even have kids that don't believe that male and female are even fixed categories. And some of these kids might be young enough, and this will be especially true with the Royal Family Kids Camp kids, that they are not necessarily rebelling against some older way of thinking. This is all they've ever known. Have you ever thought about that before? So what I want to do is today I want to talk about the newer views of sexuality and gender, talk about what the Bible says, and then give you some tips of how to handle it while you're at camp. So let's start with the newer views of sexuality and gender. I'm going to try to describe it as best as I can. I'm not trying to do a straw man. I'm going to try to explain the view that we're at now, the view that our culture seems to be transitioning toward, and then we'll talk about what the Bible says. We currently live in a world that says, and I've heard this over and over and over again, sex and gender are two different things, okay? It is now mainstream to teach that sex and gender are two completely different things. Sex is something that is biological, and the words that are used to describe the categories within it are words like male and female. Gender, on the other hand, is a social category, and the words that are used to describe it are words like man and woman, okay? So male and female is your biological terms, man and woman are your social category terms. So biological has to do with the person's body, but the words like men and woman, or men and women, those are not Those are not biological terms. These are more like lifestyles. These are roles that people play in society. These are ways of identifying oneself to one's world. So the belief is that you can be male and be a woman, right? Because you're biologically a male, but your social category, the way that you identify, the role that you play in society is woman. So you can be male and you can be a woman, or you can be female and be a man. Typically, they do not say you can be male and female. It's that you could be male and a woman, right? Because man and woman is not the same thing as male and female. That's the teaching. There's one more thing, and this one, actually, maybe I did this out of order, because this one really came first. Another thing that's very mainstream to teach now is that different people have different desires regarding the sex and or the gender that they are attracted to. And because of that, because different people have different desires regarding the sex and the gender they're attracted to, nearly all desires and nearly all attractions are considered legitimate as long as they are how you really feel. Okay? So if you're a boy and you like boys, that's fine. And here's the thing, it's fine because that's what you like, right? What you desire internally is what legitimizes what you do externally. You following the logic? Right? So it is right for you to do it because you want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, then you should not do it, right? Because that would be you not being true to yourself. So those are two of the big truths that are in that are what I'm calling the new sexuality. And I think what we need to do, and I think this is good that this is happening at camp training because we need to make this absolutely clear. The Christian worldview is completely different than that newer way of thinking about sexuality. Completely different. And so Royal Family Kids Camp and TRAC, you need to know this, these are both Christian camps. I hope you are not finding that out for the first time right now. These are both Christian camps. These are not do-gooder camps. These are not believe in a higher power camps. These are like Jesus, Bible, Christian camps. And so it is incredibly important that you know and even be able to articulate in some way what the Christian view on this is. And that's what I'm here for, okay? And so that's what I'm going to try to explain to you. Because it might come up in a conversation at camp, okay? You may have kids, and it's not like you even have to bring it up, okay? I don't even suggest you bring it up. Okay, if it needs to come up, it'll probably come up. And it may not. I have been in a cabin as a counselor, I think 4 times, and this particular topic has never come up in any of my 4 cabins. But my wife, who has been a counselor fewer times than me, it has come up in her cabins. So you never know. It may or may not come up in conversation. But I'm just saying there's no way to get around it. If it's coming, it's coming. Like you can actively try to avoid it, and you still might get roped into a conversation on this, and therefore you need to know what the Christian view on this is. You need to be able to articulate like a little bit of what the Bible says about this, because this is a Christian camp, and we are representing Christ at camp. So here's a quick rundown. Maybe take notes if you have not heard a whole lot of teaching on this. Was there a little piece of paper with notes when you first got in that folder? Yeah, whip that baby out and write some stuff down. All right, let me start with, actually, can I get a bottle of water? I feel like I'm so parched all of a sudden. Is there one? Will you give it? Oh, thank you. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to start with, and this is a very, very simple thing. The Bible teaches that God created 2 types of humans, okay? God created 2 types of humans. And this is not some like deep thing in the Bible that's very difficult, and how can we know what the Christian worldview on this is? I mean, very, very simple. The Bible teaches that God created 2 types of humans, and it's literally on the first page. Okay, so you just go, oh, where is this in the Bible? You just literally open to the first page, and it's right there on the very first page of the book. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates the world, and then this is verse 27 on the very first page of the Bible. It says, "So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them, male and female." So that's right there on the first page. How did God make the world? He created humans. Oh, really? How many types are there? There's 2 types. What are they? Male and female. That's on page 1. Those are the 2 kinds of people that God created, and it takes one of each type of the people in order to procreate, which is the subject of the very next verse. Okay, right after he made them male and female, he says, "Be fruitful and multiply." Why did God say, "Be fruitful and multiply" to the male and the female? Yes, because that's what's required. It takes one of each in order to do the very next verse. Okay? So those are the 2 types of people, and they're the only 2 types. The Bible assumes, And you can just see this all throughout. Whenever the Bible uses boy, girl, man, woman, female, male, those are the two types of humans that God made, and they are the only two types. And the Bible assumes that you can tell what type a person is. If you're wondering, well, which type is a person? How would you know? The Bible assumes that you can know by that person's body. Okay? Let me give you an example of this. It's a really interesting story. I just read to you from the first page of Genesis. Now I'll skip to the second book of the Bible. This is from the first page of Exodus. The Israelites are being oppressed in Egypt. They are like in slavery, and the Egyptians are ruling over them. And the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, he wants to keep the Israelite people oppressed. And so he wants to diminish their strength, and so he decides he wants to get rid of all of the baby boys. That's kind of what's going on here. So Exodus chapter 1, verse 15. It says, "Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives," midwives would be the women that were delivering the babies of the Israelite women. "The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives," one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other was named Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him. But if it is a daughter, she may live." The Hebrew midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. Now, how were they able to figure out which one the boys were? So what happens here, and this is important to understand, the king of Egypt assumed that you could look and you could know on the very first day whether it was a boy or a girl. The Hebrew midwives assumed that. The writer of the book of Exodus assumed that. Pretty much everybody in all of history and every culture everywhere believed that until maybe 50, 60 years ago. This was understood, and it was the assumption behind everything. So the Hebrew midwives did not go like, well, if it's a boy, kill it. How would we know? Don't we have to wait till they're like 7 and ask them, right? No, the assumption was you can know the moment that they're born. So, the Bible's understanding of the two kinds of people is pretty much a direct equivalent to the biological understanding of sex, right? Male, female, that there are two sexes. And I don't know of any other classifications regarding this, like in the scriptures. The new understanding that there's this separate thing from sex called gender that I referred to earlier, that understanding is not in there. I don't see it anywhere in there. I don't see any reason to believe it. The idea that man and woman are completely different things than male and female is found nowhere in the scripture. So that's the first thing. The second issue is, and maybe this is a more important one, because like I said earlier, this one actually came first. The second issue in our culture is that the question is, do our internal desires legitimize our actions? Is that how morality works? Because right now, mainstream education says yes. They say, you wanting to do a particular kind of sexual action is how you know it is okay for you to do it, right? The internal desire, which is often called orientation, okay? The internal desire is what legitimizes behavior. And in fact, I would say they really take it a step further than that. They don't simply say that the internal desire legitimizes behavior, because that's saying the feelings you have on the inside are what make it okay. They actually go a step farther than that, and they say the internal desires not only make it okay, but they pretty much treat it as if you are obligated to do it because of the desire you have. It's not just okay, you must act that way. And as I mentioned earlier, to behave in a way that is inconsistent with your internal desires is considered being not true to yourself, which is considered like super bad in our culture. Now again, this is in direct contradiction to every moral assumption in the scriptures. The Bible does not assume that wanting to do something makes it okay. In fact, over and over and over again, the Bible expects people to do things that they don't want to do. And so the question is usually phrased something like this. They would say, okay, would God forbid someone from doing something that is natural for them? And the answer to that is, certainly he would. He does it all the time. No, Mario. I mean, what if the desires they have are very strong and they have had them from a young age? And the answer is still, yes, God forbids people from doing things that they want to do. And this is important to get, this is not unique to sexuality. This is just this is morality. Like when you think about the 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments are essentially 10 things you're not supposed to do. Only one of them is about sex. The other 9 of them are all things that people want to do, and they still aren't supposed to do them. You're not supposed to dishonor your parents, you're not supposed to murder, you're not supposed to lie, you're not supposed to steal. And it's important to think this through. The reason those 10 things are forbidden in the 10 Commandments is because people want to do them. Are you following me? I mean, let's just think about the 10th commandment, because this one I think is a really good one for illustration. Anybody know what the 10th commandment is? Got a big room with Christians here. I'm sure, hoping somebody in the room knows what the 10th commandment is. Anybody know the last one? What is it? Don't covet. Very good. Here, you can have this free t-shirt. Am I allowed to? Okay. All right, don't covet. What is covet? Anybody know what it means? Can we just get a definition? Yeah. Yep. Coveting it's similar to jealousy, right? It is, I wish she has this thing, I wish I had it. I wish he didn't have it, I wish I had it, okay? Now I want you to think about it. Coveting, first of all, it's an internal desire, right? Coveting is different than murder, it's different than lying, right? It's an internal thing, right? You can't actually even see someone covet. You can see someone, steal. You can't see someone covet. It happens on the inside of you. Coveting is an internal desire. It varies from person to person. Does it not? Not everybody gets the same scoop of coveting desire, right? Not all of us deal with that temptation the same way. Some people are more materialistic than others. Some people are greedier than others. Some people are going to have a harder time obeying do not covet than other people will. So it's an internal desire. It varies from person to person. And how far does it go back? Like the people who struggle with it, how long have they been struggling with it? Their whole lives. I mean, at what age do you start coveting? Right? I mean, for most of us, it's farther back than your memory goes, right? I mean, with my kids, I feel like it was somewhere between six months and 12 months is when they started like ripping rattles out of other babies' hands, right? And I'm assuming that before they did that, like there was a thought, right? There was a desire. So there's this internal desire. It varies from person to person, and it goes back to when we were little kids. And even though all of that is true, God still says, don't. God says it's not good for you. Just as he does with homosexuality and other sexual immoralities in places like 1 Corinthians 6. So that is as quick and as clear as I know how to make it. And so what I want to do now is I want to end. I'm hoping that all makes sense to you and you at least go, okay, I think I could explain what the Christian view on this is. And so I'm going to end with giving you 5 tips of how I think this stuff is related to camp. Okay? 5 tips for how to handle this at camp. Tip number 1, don't be so shockable, okay? Don't be so shockable at camp. If you have a kid in your cabin, if one of the campers comes up to you and says, hey, last year I was a lesbian, this year I'm a pansexual, if you react by going, it will probably not help you minister to that kid any better than if you had kept it inside, right? So I want you to remember what I said earlier. This kid that you're talking to, it's not that they have carefully considered the Christian worldview and rejected it, right? No, she's 11, and it's all she's ever known. What she knows is all she's ever known. So if you are over 40, I'm probably especially thinking of you. We are the people that are more likely to be shockable because this is different from the way we grew up. If you are under 40, and especially if you are under 30, you are less likely to be so shockable because you've grown up in this transitional time between traditional sexuality and whatever it is we're headed toward. Okay, so that was number 1. Don't be so shockable. Number 2, don't treat Christians and non-Christians the same. This is important. Don't treat Christians and non-Christians the same. This is something that actually applies outside of camp, and so I'm going to go ahead and just read it to you from 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul's writing to the Corinthians. He tells them how to handle sexually immoral people, and this is really interesting. So just listen closely. This is God's word. He says, I wrote to you in a letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. I did not mean the immoral people of this world, or the greedy and swindlers, or idolaters. Otherwise, you would have to leave the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer who is sexually immoral, or greedy, an idolater, or verbally abusive, a drunkard, or a swindler. Do not even eat with such a person. For what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? Don't you judge those who are insiders? But God judges outsiders. Put away the evil person from among yourselves. I think that this concept is so important to understand. I don't know how many of you read that passage before, but it's an eye-opener, isn't it? I think it's important for you to understand the vast majority of our campers at both of these camps, they are non-Christians. And so we treat them that way, okay? So I guess what I'm saying is when a fellow believer that's in your church, in your small group, in your Sunday school class, starts participating in bisexual behavior, I believe you are supposed to call it out. Because in that case, it's hypocrisy. But the 11-year-old at camp is not being a hypocrite. She's being a non-Christian. All right, number 3. So we've got don't be so shockable. Don't treat Christians and non-Christians the same. Number 3, keep the focus on Jesus more than on their gender or sexuality. Keep the focus on Jesus more than on their gender or sexuality. You may or may not like this next thing I say, but you might realize just practically it's the way it has to be. It is not our goal at camp to transform and conform all of the campers' thinking and all of their sexual behaviors to match traditional sexuality during the week or the weekend we are with them. Like, it's not that that's not a good goal. It's just saying that's not what camp is for. That's not what we're trying to accomplish with that week. Some of these kids have been discipled by TikTok and Instagram and public school and Cartoon Network, and you are unlikely to undo everything that they have been taught in 3 to 5 days. And so we sort of have to pick our battles on this, and our goal is to introduce them to Jesus. The gospel is our first and primary focus. That doesn't mean it doesn't ever come up. I'm just saying when you're putting the priorities up there, Jesus and the gospel is number 1. That's our goal, to introduce them to Jesus, because even if you were able to change all of their aberrant sexual beliefs in 5 days, if you were able to accomplish that, but they didn't know about Jesus, and that's the spiritual things they get from us. Do you realize what happens? They still die and go to hell, right? So we get them to act like they're living in the 50s, but they don't know Jesus, and then what happens? They die and go to hell. I can remember when I was a young preacher, and I was asked to preach at a banquet for a Christian school, and the people that came to the banquet, it was the juniors and seniors of the school. And I was the one that was asked to be the keynote speaker at this banquet. And I asked the leadership at the Christian school, what should I talk to the kids about? And they went, tell them to stop drinking. They said, because what happens is these Christian kids all come to this banquet and do the Christian banquet thing, and then they leave, and they all go somewhere and they get drunk afterwards. All the kids go get drunk after the banquet. So why don't you tell them to not drink? Well, I was familiar enough with this school that I realized the reason the kids are coming to the Christian school banquet is, well, first of all, because their parents paid for them to be there. And then the reason that they leave the Christian banquet and go get drunk is because they're not Christians. And so I remember, even back then, I was young, and I remember thinking, it seems to me it would be better for me to make sure that they understand the gospel than me just try to spend a lot of time convincing them not to drink that night, because what if I accomplish it? What if I get them to not drink that night, but they continue to be people who don't love Jesus? What would that, why do I care whether they go to hell sober or thirsty or whatever? And so, once someone truly becomes a follower of Jesus, their behaviors start to change. But at camp, we only have 3 to 5 days, and so we focus on the gospel first. A good example of this, I think, and this is something I heard secondhand, so I'm going to let her correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that Trish Farrell said something. Where are you, Trish? Okay, I heard that you said something. I'm going to quote you, and then if I get it wrong, I'm going to allow you to correct this, okay, so I don't besmirch your reputation. But this is what I heard you said, so you tell me if I got it right or wrong. But what I heard is, the discussion was, what do you do when you're at camp? And the kids say things like, well, I identify as blah, blah, blah. And I heard that what Trish says, that's what she would say is, I identify as a follower of Jesus Christ. That would be what she would respond back. And to me, I thought that was such a fantastic response because, first of all, so this person is saying, well, I identify as a whatever. And so she is communicating to them, that's not even how we're supposed to identify ourselves. We shouldn't identify ourselves by our sexual desires, but by who our life revolves around, who we live for, who our God is, right? I identify as a follower of Jesus. Was it pretty close? Okay, good. Fantastic answer. Have a t-shirt. All right. Number 4. So if you're keeping notes here, don't be so shockable. Don't treat Christians and non-Christians the same. Keep the focus on Jesus. Number 4, if the issue comes up, do not lie and don't offend unnecessarily. If the issue comes up, do not lie and don't offend unnecessarily. So what do I mean by that? Okay, let's say you have a kid that uses different pronouns than their biological sex. What are you supposed to do? Okay, they go, I want to go by, whatever it is. First of all, don't freak out. It may not matter a whole lot if you aren't in their cabin, because pronouns are the kind of thing that you usually use when a person is not around, not when they're right in front of you. Like, I don't say a lot of like she and him when the person's right in front of me. You use things more like their name or the word you when you're talking to them. So if they're not in your cabin, it may not even matter. But I could imagine if they're in your cabin, there could come a situation where you would talk about them in the third person while they're within earshot, okay? And so what do? And this is what I'm saying. These are the two major guidelines. Number one, don't lie. Personally, I would not use the word him to describe a girl. I believe it is a form of lying. Now, you might go, well, what if that greatly upsets the person? Okay, well, here's an idea. You could use their name, right? Like, yeah, like technically, pronouns are not, they're not necessary. Like, we just use them out of convenience. You don't have to. You technically could be in a cabin, and you could say, hand Terry's sleeping bag back to Terry, okay? Yes, it's awkward, but I'm just saying, using their name is not offensive, and it's not a lie. And this would apply to other things other than pronouns, okay? Just anything. If the kid asks you a question about whatever it is, about their parents, about your parents, about what you think things ought to be, whatever it is, what does the Bible say about such and such? If the kid asks you a question, do not lie. Like, do not say anything untrue from God's perspective. But also, do not offend unnecessarily. What do I mean? So, I'm saying, let's say someone comes up, one of the kids comes up to you and they go, I identify as a demisexual genderqueer. Okay, well, I've already covered, I think, you're laughing, that's totally possible. So I think Trish Farrell's answer is fantastic to say I identify as a follower of Jesus Christ. But I'm not saying you have to say that exact answer. You're going to be in different situations. The conversation won't always go the same way. You're going to have to be, contemporary, what's the word? What? Yes, extemporaneous on this stuff. You can't plan out every conversation. But you can decide ahead of time, I'm not going to lie and I'm not going to offend unnecessarily. Okay, so let me give an example of not being offensive. Person says, hey, I identify as a demisexual genderqueer. Okay, if you go, oh, you poor little brainwashed liberal zombie child. Like, that is unnecessarily offensive. No reason to talk that way to one of the kids. Okay? On the other hand, let's say they say, I identify as a demisexual genderqueer, and you are not to go, that's cool, because it's not cool, right? So not offensive, but do not lie. And I hope that that's good enough that will guide you in all your conversations. There may come a point where you go, oh my, I don't even understand. Like, you made it to where, okay, well, I'm not supposed to lie, but I'm also supposed to try not to offend. And what if I can't pull those off? And what if I'm not a creative enough person in the moment to come up with something that is both true and not offensive? Then what do I do? Like, if I have to err toward one side or the other, which one do I err toward? Can you imagine being in that situation, knowing I don't know which one to go with? Okay, and so obviously, if you can come up with something that's true and non-offensive, I want you to do it. But if you're going, I don't know which I want to do, which side of the fence do I fall off of if I got to do one? You err to the side of truth. Because, this is why, because lying is a sin. Offending someone is not always a sin. Jesus offended people, right? So we always err to the side of truth. But I am telling you, what we want you to do at camp is to deliver the truth in a way that does not offend unnecessarily, if you possibly can. All right, number 5. Love all the kids the same. Love all the kids the same. If you have a kid in your cabin who identifies as gay or lesbian, love them. Love them like all the other kids. And when I say like all the other kids, don't show tons of extra attention to them. Oh, she's a lesbian. She's now the superstar of the cabin. Like, just treat her like all the other kids. Treat him like all the other kids. Don't treat them extra special. But here's the thing. Do not avoid them because you're worried that an awkward conversation might happen. Do not avoid them just because it might be difficult for you to handle what they might say. Love all the kids the same. Love them all 100%. Let me go ahead and can I pray? And then we'll do whatever you want to do next. All right. God, I pray for this camp right now and all these campers and all these counselors that are going to be here for the campers when we do camp this summer. And I thank you for them. I pray that you would guide us into truth. And I pray that you would guide us into love. And I don't know, there may be some people in this room that they have much more difficult time with truth than they do love. And maybe some people in this room have a much more difficult time with love than they do truth. But I pray that you would help us to be people who are compassionate and see every single kid at this camp as someone who's made in your image and who needs to know you and who is loved by you. And therefore, we won't lie to them. And so I pray that you would, there's probably, I would imagine there's probably some work that we need you to do in our hearts before we can even walk into some of these situations. And so it's probably good that camp's not tomorrow. I pray that over the next however many weeks it is away, I pray that you would work in and among us and lead us into truth and grace and prepare us to be the people who can minister to these kids as representatives of Jesus Christ. For we bear his name, and we pray in his name. We love you. Amen. Thank you guys for listening.